After months of threatening to wage war, North Korea is reaching out to its neighbour. It's restored a Red Cross hotline with South Korea and promised to hold talks. So why now? Is this a sign of peace on the troubled peninsula, or another attempt by North Korea to stop further sanctions? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem Seeker. Well, the hotline between North and South Korea is once again up and running, which means officials from the two countries can talk directly to one another. This, of course, comes after months of tensions and even threats of a nuclear war. On Thursday, North Korea proposed to hold talks with South Korean officials to normalize commercial projects between the two nations. That means reopening the Kaesong Joint Industrial Zone, which was shut down by North Korea at the height of tensions in early April. That's when the United Nations imposed new sanctions against the secretive North for conducting its third nuclear test back in February. The two Koreas haven't talked to each other since February 2011. And this recent development is raising hopes that the two sides might be moving towards a thawing of relations. So let's take a closer look at the tensions earlier this year and the sequence of events that have led to this point. In December, North Korea conducted its first successful long-range rocket launch. The United Nations Security Council responded the following month, as we said, with a new round of sanctions. 2 months later, North Korea performed its third nuclear test, prompting an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Then in March, North Korea, for the first time, threatened to launch preemptive nuclear strikes against the United States and South Korea. The statement came hours before the UN Security Council tightened financial sanctions against Pyongyang. The same month, Pyongyang cut off the hotline between North and South Korea and said it had torn up the nation's ceasefire accord signed in 1953. Well, let's bring in our guests now. Joining us from Hong Kong, Richard Hu, Associate Professor at the University of Hong Kong. From Beijing, we have Victor Gao, Director at the China National Association of International Studies. From London on Skype, Alessio Patalano, lecturer in war studies at King's College London and director of the Asian Security and Warfare Research Group. But we'll start with Mr. Han Sung-ju, former South Korean ambassador to the US and former South Korean foreign minister. He joins us on the phone from the Korean capital, Seoul. Thank you for being with us, sir. I'm sure you will see this as a positive development and a welcome change from all of the threats and brinkmanship that we saw from North Korea just a few weeks ago. But just how significant is this in the general scheme of things?
Well, I think it is a significant move. North Korea has decided to come back to the dialogue table, partly because China has been urging North Korea to do that, and partly because they need the income from the Kaesong industrial complex, which they virtually closed a couple of months ago.
So it sounds from what you're saying that North Korea was essentially backed into a corner here. So there's no indication then months from now that we may be back to the same thing with all of the brinkmanship and the threats of war that we heard earlier this year.
Well, with the almost infantile way that North Korea has been acting, there's no telling what the next move is going to be. But clearly there has been a failure on their part with their bluffing and bellicose rhetoric, and which has not only not gotten anywhere, but also which has cost them very much. And now they want to return to talks with South Korea so that they can have some economic benefits from those talks and the relationship.
So where does this leave South Korea at this point? I mean, your president, Park Geun-hye, who is a conservative, has maintained this tough line that North Korea must give up its nuclear weapons first, before anything else, before the way is open for any easing of international sanctions. Does this now put a bit of pressure on her to perhaps take a softer line with the North, to take perhaps a more conciliatory approach?
Well, in fact, this is some kind of a victory for her, because she has been insisting that to reopen the industrial complex and to have any discussion with North Korea, it has to be talk between governments, not between private parties, as North Korea has been insisting. And now North Korea has come around, and so it is not that the South Korean government, President Park, are reluctantly responding, but this is what President Park has been urging, demanding that North Korea do.
All right, thanks very much for your time, Han Sung-ju, former South Korean ambassador to the US and former foreign minister. Thank you very much for being with us on Inside Story. Well, Rich, let's turn then to our other three guests. Richard Hu in Hong Kong. What do you make of these latest offer of talks from North Korea? Is this a step in the right direction?
Yes, this is something international society will welcome. And this is something shows North Koreans' brinkmanship. The probation is a failure. And the North Korean Sea is getting more and more internationally isolated. So it has to change course. And secondly, it feels the pinch of economic sanctions. So it has to turn to negotiation table for aid and for other assistance. And the other things I would make from this is North Korean leaders see this time China is not with them. And so China even becoming more critical to North Korea's policy. So they have to change course.
Victor Gao, what do you make of all this, and why now?
No, I think this latest development is an encouraging sign of development, and it is a step in the right direction. However, I think this step in itself is not sufficient. I think we need to keep the eye on the major picture and on the ultimate goal. That is the complete denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. Now, in this sense, neither China nor Russia would ever recognize DPRK as a nuclear power country. And that has been made very clear to the DPRK leaders. And I think they should have no false expectation that either China or Russia will change course on this particular point. The United States will also not recognize DPRK as a nuclear power country. Therefore, I think we need to continue to work with DPRK, and let's give diplomacy a chance to prevail eventually. And I think DPRK need to keep walking in the right direction until the ultimate goal of complete denuclearization will be achieved on the Korean peninsula. And DPRK should also recognize that denuclearization is actually in its own interest. It is not only good for the DPRK people, it is also good for the DPRK regime. This is the point that we need to keep emphasizing to DPRK.
Alessio Patalano, is that an analysis that you share? I mean, it's welcome that they're talking about talks rather than going to war with each other. But does this really address the fundamental stumbling block when it comes to North Korea, and that is its nuclear program?
I don't think this addresses that particular component of the issue. I think the timing is very interesting. Ahead of an important meeting where China and the United States will most likely discuss the situation of the North Korean nuclear program. Of course, this attempt to open again a channel of communication with South Korea changes in a way in North Korea's favor, because they can also try to avoid pushing China into a direction that would be increasingly less supportive of the North Korean government. However, what the past few months demonstrated is also that the North Koreans at the moment, and Kim Jong-un in particular in his attempt to consolidate his position, find themselves with very few cards at their disposal to play. So more than ever before, the use of missile tests, nuclear underground tests are an essential bargaining chip at their end, from their perspective, in order to attract international aid and economic support.
Well, the sudden change in Pyongyang's rhetoric comes as the US and China are holding high-level meetings, with North Korea being one of the main topics of discussion. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in the US for informal talks with President Obama, whose administration says it welcomes the news of talks between the two Koreas. Although it's North Korea's only major ally, China has backed UN sanctions over the North's recent nuclear tests. It's also taken steps to prevent the Bank of China from doing business with North Korea's largest foreign exchange bank. Victor Gao, how much of China's hand do you see in all of this, in particular this latest decision by North Korea to, some would say, back down and go back to talks?
I think the fact that DPRK is making these announcements to South Korea just on the eve of the informal summit meeting between President Xi Jinping of China and the US President Obama is significant in itself. The timing is also a very important factor. Now, I think China has consistently made its position well known, not only to DPRK, but to the other participants in the six-party talk framework, as well as to the international community, that China firmly opposes the nuclearization program of DPRK, and the ultimate goal China wants to help to achieve is complete denuclearization on the Korean peninsula. China has also urged all the parties relevant to this issue to exercise calm, to refrain from excessive move, and to create an environment where ultimately this goal, a very noble goal, can be achieved. And I think China has delivered its message very clear to the leadership of DPRK, because recently DPRK sent a special envoy to China and he met with Chinese leaders. And I think these quiet diplomacy on China's part has been working, and I think China will continue to do its bit to help all the other parties to the six-party talk to make sure that we can urge DPRK to come back to the negotiation table. So, as I emphasized just now, this step to open the talk about the industrial park itself is good, is a necessary step, but it is not sufficient. We need to still focus on the bigger picture. And I think this part of the world cannot have enduring peace until ultimately decolonialization is completely achieved. This is the goal we need to focus upon.
Richard Hu, do you get the sense that there is this feeling of exasperation on the part of Chinese when it comes to the North Koreans? I mean, the North Koreans, China is North Korea's only real ally in the region, and the fact that they are seeming to not to welcome what North Korea has done so far this year. How much is that a statement on the point to the point where things have got with North Korea?
Pretty much true. I think China is North Korea's ally, so-called ally. It's not the same sense like South Korea and the United States. And China clearly distanced itself from North Korea since the North Koreans' missile launching last year, and especially the nuclear test this year. So North Koreans see that, and they understand China is very unhappy with what North Korea's behavior. So North Korea now changing its tactics, I think, is exploring a new course. And as I agree with other speakers, they are exploring. And they are exploring first with the South Korean to start the Kaesong Industrial Park, and then they probably will continue do so along that line. But the other powers need to discuss. I know they're already discussing now between U.S., China, South Korea, and China, discuss what to do next and how serious North Korea and what kind of context we can conduct future talks with North Korea, and then what's the best strategy for international society to bring North Korea back to the negotiation table, P6 talks, to finally denuclearize Korean Peninsula.
Alessio Patalano, what do you think is behind this? How much has this got to do with Chinese pressure ahead of that summit with that China summit with Obama and the toughened UN sanctions following North Korea's nuclear test?
I think there is certainly a great deal of importance in the role that China, in terms of influence that it can exercise over the North Korean regime into the equation. I completely agree with the other speakers. I would, however, add a domestic dimension pertaining to the consolidation of Kim Jong-un's power. I think it is very interesting to know that General Choi Ryong-hae was sent as a special envoy. Now, when we look back at the personal history of this officer, we know that he has a strong connection, personal ties with the young leader. So I think in the current situation, what we should keep in mind as we progress into a new round of negotiations with North Korea is that the North Korean regime is completing a transition phase that started with the rise of Kim Jong-un, and what from the outside we don't know for sure, but certainly was a degree of tension in the changes at the top ranks of the military, and also in terms of finding a new balance between the young leader and his uncle that was a very prominent feature, especially during the last months of Kim Jong-il's life. So there is an element of the story in this component that one should bear in mind in terms of the evolution and the timing of brinkmanship that has perhaps less to do with North Korea attracting international attention, but also with a consolidation of power on behalf of Kim Jong-un, who has to prove to his own regime, to his own top-ranking military elites, and to Chinese authorities that he is in control, that he is human for the top tickets.
That's a valid point, isn't it, Victor Gao? I mean, there is so little that we know for sure about the way North Korea's leadership works. But how much was this about a new young leader trying to essentially show off his muscle? Much of this was for domestic consumption in Pyongyang. He's essentially done that now. He's firmed up his base of support, and now it's time to get back to talk to the negotiating table. Is that a valid assessment in your view?
I would say it will be very difficult, if not impossible, to completely put oneself into the shoe of this young leader in DPRK and figure out what exactly he will be looking at all this and what is the strategic goals he wants to achieve by all these recent flurry of activities. However, one thing is clear for the record, that DPRK has a lot of concern about the survivability of the political system, about the continuation of the regime, and they view the US-South Korean alliance as a threat to its own political system and the survivability of the country, and it normally will go into hysterical mood if there is a joint exercise between the United States and South Korea. Therefore, I think to follow this line of logic, I think China is doing the right thing by urging all the parties to exercise reason, to let rationality prevail, to exercise caution in dealing with DPRK, and to avoid anything which may add to their hysterical concern about external threat to the survivability of their regime. And I think on this basis, we need to work an extra mile to create incentive for DPRK to calm down, to reduce their anxiety, and also to create enough incentive for them to get rid of their nuclear weapon program. That's the ultimate goal, and eventually, hopefully, DPRK will be able to live in peace.
Let's talk specifics here then. What kind of incentives
I think DPRK, yes, DPRK has insisted that they want to sign up a peace treaty with the United States. It's kind of like a non-aggression, so that if they give up the nuclear weapon, the United States will not create an excuse to invade North Korea. You know, from the Americans' perspective, they think this kind of requirement is kind of out of reason, and they will not deal with this as a precondition for their bilateral relations discussions between DPRK and the United States. States. Now, each one has its own way of looking at this between DPRK and South Korea or DPRK and the United States. The point I want to make is that we need to understand what exactly drives DPRK in that particular direction. What can they gain by clamoring and insisting on becoming a nuclear power state? What is the ultimate goal of having these nuclear weapons by DPRK, and whether we can create a situation where there will be enough incentive for DPRK to finally discontinue and abandon their nuclear power and come back to be a denuclearized country and to be able to live in peace with South Korea and become a really responsible member in the Northeastern community, Asia community. And I hope that will be the ultimate goal we want to achieve in this part of the world. We need to make our bottom line very clear to DPRK, but we also want to help them to reduce their own anxiety in coming to terms with itself on this particular front.
Richard Hu, we've been down this road before with North Korea, haven't we? We see this often very bellicose action, nuclear tests, lots of aggressive talk from Pyongyang, and then eventually we see some sort of back down, heading back to the negotiating table, and then it all starts up again. I mean, what signs are there that things will be anything different this time around?
Yes, you're right. This is a patent behavior on the part of North Korea. So I think there's a risk we may repeat the cycle again. The cycle is North Korean provoking, and then crisis, and then North Korean relax its stance, and then there's some kind of negotiation, talk, diplomacy, and then North Korean just do whatever it'd like to do. So the cycle has been repeated over the last decades several times. So we need this time to be very clear what is the bottom line, the message sent to the North Korean. And then the other parties need to have some kind of a real solidarity, and will not let North Korean to divide the other parties. North Korean, they are very skillful. They know the cracks, and then they try to divide the other parties. So they explore the difference among the other parties, and then this is the tricks they did. So we need to be very careful this times. And today's news just the first step. The North Korean began to exploring again. So we need to be careful and but to make clear what we really want, and then draw the line clearly, not on the sand.
Alessio Patalano, final thoughts then. Do you see, is this going to lead to any long-term change?
It is difficult to say. I think an important point that perhaps was not made sufficiently clear earlier. I think if we listen, if we read the official statements and positions from the North Koreans, there is an element of fundamental threat represented by the fact that they haven't yet normalized their relations with the United States, and I think that is a part of the rhetoric that underpins their intention to pursue nuclear capabilities. But of course, this, at the other end, from an American perspective, is a non-starter. So I suppose that in the long term, one of the key issues that one should be looking at is how to provide that type of security guarantees that would enable the North Koreans to feel sufficiently comfortable to start talking again about their nuclear arsenal. For the moment, this is still very much to be seen.
All right, will certainly be very interesting to see how all of this does play out over the coming weeks and months, and no doubt we will revisit North Korea again at some point. But for now, thanks very much to all of our guests, Richard Hu, Victor Gao and Alessio Patalano. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Remember, if you want to send us your feedback, you can just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. There you see the address on your screen. For everyone here, I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks again for watching. The latest news is up next. Bye for now.